Hey, what's up everybody? Richard Gaming Guy here. Today in this video, we're going to unbox, demo, and review this handheld console right here. This is the Anbernic RG35XX Plus handheld video game console. So we're going to unbox this. We're going to take a look at what this offers us in terms of layouts, controls, and then of course we'll dive into this and see what comes on here stock on the micro SD cards installed within. So let's dive into it and see what it has to offer. All right, guys, here we are with the Anbernic RG35XX Plus. We'll go ahead and start unboxing this. So we have the console right here. I'll set that aside for right now. Let's see what else is included in here. So it looks like it comes with some wipes, and I assume that's for, here we go, a screen protector, which is included within there. So that's always good to have to protect your screen. We have a little user manual here. And a few things I want to make mention of as I just kind of thumb through here is the RG35XX Plus offers 1 GB of DDR4 RAM, which is great compared to the original version of this console. We also have a major upgrade to the chipset here. This actually uses the All-Winner H700, which integrates 4 Cortex A53 CPU cores, clocked at 1.5 gigahertz, as well as a dual-core Mali G31 M2 GPU. So definitely seems like we're going to see some significant upgrades with this. Now this does walk through functions, features, it walks through what the LED indicator lights are doing based on the color that it's displaying. So it does seem to walk through a lot of great information here. So I'll set this aside. Now we should have our power supply cable in this little compartment right here. We just open that up to verify. And I imagine it's Type-C. Yep, all right, so we have USB-A to Type-C. So you can plug this into an outlet if you have an outlet that supports USB-A connections, or you could, of course, just plug this into a PC, which is probably what most of us would end up connecting this to. So let's go over here, and we will dive into the actual handheld itself. All right, guys, so here we have the Anbernic RG35XX Plus handheld. And the first thing I notice on here is the finish of this, actually. So this is the white console, but we have this finish that actually feels like it's a little bit rougher, in all honesty. It's smooth to the touch, but it has that like sort of raised surface where it feels like a non-skid surface, which I actually really like. This sits in here very nicely. It's almost like, think of like wood that hasn't been painted. So, you know, it's a little bit rougher, but still smooth, if that makes sense. So it's not a super glossy finish where it's slippery, and that's usually what I'm used to seeing in these handheld consoles. So I actually really like the way that this sits in here. So D-pad over here, we have our standard 4-button configuration, but the D-pad feels really nice. A little bit tight, but I actually like that. It definitely seems like you can maneuver from within here rather than, you know, having to hit the edge of those 4 corners, which is nice. It's always a great way to check the action. The menu button has good response and feedback there. I like the start and select, which reminds me of an old school Game Boy. But the A, B, X, and Y, they do feel a little bit smaller, but they're actually raised up quite a bit. I know it's a little bit hard to see. Maybe if I put my finger there, you'll see, you know, the profile of this, but they're definitely a little bit taller than what I'm used to on these 4-button configuration buttons for a handheld, but the action is phenomenal. Nice gloss to the top of it as well. Just feels super responsive, so I'm really liking that. Definitely feels better than the original RG35XX, the regular version. Now on the backside, we have our R1, R2, L1, and L2 shoulder and trigger buttons. Nice layout on there. They definitely feel comfortable. Good action for sure. Doesn't take much to engage those buttons, and I can really, you know, rapid fire on those easily. So definitely like the way that those are laid out. And they're actually kind of tapered off here. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see if I can put it like that. They taper down, so the highest point is actually in the center on the L2 and the R2, and then it tapers downward here, which just feels really nice as far as where your fingers would line up on here. So I'm liking that. We have our power button on the right-hand side, reset button right below that. We have our TF1 and TF2 micro SD card slots there. Volume control is on the left-hand side, so we have plus to bring the volume up, minus to bring it down. And then we also have, right up here at the top, we have our mini HDMI connection right here. And it says HD right at the top as well. We have some LED indicator lights there. Now bottom, we have our headphone jack, and then we also have our Type-C port, which is how we'll actually connect that power supply cable. So everything looks really great here. Oh, and we have the battery pack, of course, in the back, and this also has a significantly upgraded battery on here from the original version. This actually gives us a 27% increase in the handheld's battery capacity. So this is going to last us a lot longer on each charge than the original version. So let's go ahead and power this on and see what the layout is like on the stock microSD card. All right, guys, so I'm booting this up right now, and I forgot to mention to you guys, this is a 64 gigabyte microSD card that's included in here, and that's actually up here in the microSD card slot all the way up at the top, so our TF1 slot. So this is the layout on here by default. We have over here our game rooms. That's going to be our game collections, RA game here. The next one's favorites. That's a custom collection you'll go ahead and set up for yourself. And then we have history, where it will actually give you the latest games that you were diving into. We also have a search bar over here. So if we go in here, we can actually search for certain titles. So we'll test that out momentarily. And then we have settings in here. So we can go into settings. We can check our battery information. We can lock our screen. We can do a backlit brightness, which I'll actually see if I can turn that up. We're on level 4. I'll turn that up to level 5. Back out, so it's a little bit brighter now, and then we're back to our game rooms. So let's go through here. I'm actually going to lower the volume just for the sake of this tour video here, and let's go through and check out exactly what is offered here in terms of games, because I think that's what most people are going to be super excited about here. What can this handle? And then at the end of this, we'll jump into some gameplay demos. So in here, we have PSP games right at the very top. So let's see, we have how many PSP games? 9 total games in here. And let's see which titles we have. So it's not just PSP mini games, which is always good to see. That's always a bummer when you dive in here and you have just the minis. So we're seeing some Metal Slug, some Mega Man, Castlevania, Bomberman. We also have Ridge Racer here, Pac-Man Championship Edition. We have Tekken 6, Tekken 5, 2 of my favorite Tekken games there actually. So definitely stoked to jump in here and test this particular collection out. And of course, PSP's performance. So PS1 over here, how many PS1 games? We have 33 PS1 games. So we've got Alien Trilogy, and I like the way that we have the text list on the on the left. Right-hand side, we have box art, logo, and the actual screenshot in the background. So that's kind of a nice layout here. And they're not all that way. This one's just just some box art. So a little inconsistent there with how they've scraped stuff. I noticed that a little bit before. So like this one again has a lot more than just Dino Crisis 2 up here, but I'm seeing some pretty cool titles. We have Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. We've got Nitro Kart Racing here, so Crash Team Racing. Some Castlevania. We've got Broken Sword up here. Saw some Breath of Fire. Looks like 3 and 4. Gran Turismo, Grand Theft Auto 2, some Mega Man, some Mortal Kombat, some Metal Gear Solid, Need for Speed, Ridge Racer, Spider-Man, Tales of Destiny, Tekken 3. Definitely some great PS1 titles here. So 33 games in total isn't, a massive amount by any means, but certainly gets you started. So we have Vertical Arcade here, which is an interesting way to section this out. And there's 156 titles here, so we'll just kind of scroll through this. Now, this one's a little bit harder to read given the fact that they're just giving you a screenshot from the gameplay over here on the right-hand side. I'd love it if they had the logo there. Or a shot at the, the cover art or box art. Definitely would make it a little bit, easier to read, but certainly seems like a lot of titles. So pretty good for Vertical Arcade. We'll back out. We have Capcom System 1, 30 titles in here. And I like this much better. We have the screenshot with the box art with the logo. So just a little easier to choose from. Definitely some classic titles in here. And it looks to be pretty complete here for Capcom 1. Capcom 2, 36 titles. Same sort of layout there with the box art, screenshot, and logo. We have Capcom System 3, which is always the smaller one. 5 titles there. Back out, Neo Geo. So what do we have for Neo Geo? 152 titles, pretty standard there. We have cover art for this one as well. So I'm sure we're going to find if we scroll down, the titles I jump into most for Neo Geo would always be the Metal Slug titles. So let's go down there and see what we have for Metal Slug. There we go. So we have Metal Slug. Yeah, we've got all of them here, so that's good. So back out of Neo Geo, we have FB Neo over here. So we're going to get some more arcade titles over here. And there's a little bit of crossover between this and the vertical arcade collection. Not a ton, but certainly some. And 473 games in this collection. And this is one of my favorites. I love classic arcade. So let's back out of FB Neo. We have MAME over here. So MAME, we have 493 titles. And we're going to see some crossover here as well. So definitely, actually, a lot of crossover here. And I actually like FB Neo, but yeah, you don't want to have the exact same game list. And I can't say it's exact, but there's definitely, you know, a good amount of duplicates across the board between those two collections in here. So let's back out of this collection, keep it moving down. We have Game Boy Advance with how many titles? 232 titles, so not a lot for Game Boy Advance. Game Boy Advance, you can easily have over 1,000 titles on a setup like this. I mean, 64 gigabytes is a smaller capacity, so not necessarily on this capacity when considering all the other collections, but Game Boy Advance itself doesn't take up a ton of space. So definitely looks like a good selection from what I'm seeing. Definitely some popular titles in here. So we'll back out. We have NES over here with 432 games. And definitely smaller collections on here, I'm noticing, but I'm okay with that. You know, how many, you know, if you had over 1,000 games for this collection, how many of those would you actually play? You'd play a whole lot less than 432, I guarantee you that. So I know sometimes these numbers don't look super attractive, but when you actually think about it, it definitely makes sense to not overload collections. So I'm certainly not mad at, you know, a lesser number with some of these more retro collections. So Super Nintendo over here, we have 429 games for Super Nintendo. And I'll actually go up the other way this time. So we'll go up through the alphabet backwards. So we have some T2 in here, got some Star Wars titles. Definitely some good stuff in Super Nintendo. We'll back out. We have SMS. So this is going to be Sega Master System here with 353 titles. And there's definitely crossover between this and Super Nintendo. So, you know, don't be alarmed if you're seeing, you know, a lot of duplicates here. They're different versions, so I'm totally okay when it belongs to a different collection. You just don't want to see like 10 of the same title within the same collection here. If there's, you know, a couple different versions, like maybe you get a MAME version, maybe you'll get a Super Nintendo version and a Master System version or Genesis, then that doesn't bother me. So here we have Mega Drive here with 481 games here. So it seems like they kept each of these around that 450 plus number, which is consistent. It definitely seems like a solid collection. We'll dive into some games from some of these collections momentarily. Game Boy Color, we've got 375 titles. And everything is scraped very nicely. I like the layout here. We have regular Game Boy, 403 titles. So it's definitely looking good here. Not seeing any red flags or inconsistencies anywhere. Over here we have PC Engine with 328 titles. It's looking good. And we have Neo Geo Pocket Color, 41 titles here. Not one I dive into a whole lot, but there are some pretty cool titles in here. And then we have Game Gear from Sega, 328 games, which is cool, but I think we get most of these titles in other collections, in all honesty, which you'd probably rather play them in those other collections, but still a cool collection to have. And then our last collection here is going to be Wonder Swan Color. So we'll go in there, see what we have. We have 73 games in total over here. So not a collection I dive into personally, but certainly nice to have. So that was all in game rooms. Now, if we go over here to the next category, we have RA game. Now, if we go in here, yeah, we're going to find some of the same collections and games that we saw previously, but we also have Open Bore in here with an additional 8 titles. And I actually love Open Bore. It's kind of a nice twist on those side-to-side beat-em-up style games. We also have Dreamcast in here, which is interesting. I wasn't expecting that, and there's 13 Dreamcast titles, which I think is pretty decent for, you know, this particular handheld, and I just wasn't expecting it. But hey, look, we also have my favorite game of all time, Gauntlet Legends, in here, and my favorite version of this is for Dreamcast. So I'm stoked to actually see that. I'm going to dive into this. Daytona USA is another great title. Crazy Taxi 1 and 2, of course. The House of the Dead 2, awesome. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Power Stone 1 and 2, Silent Scope, Soul Calibur, Virtua Tennis. This is literally all of my favorite titles for Dreamcast. There's a few that I'm not as familiar with, Cosmic Smash being one of them, but there's some really amazing games in here for Dreamcast. I know it's only 13 games, but the selection is on point. So I'm going to definitely dive in there. PlayStation, we have the same 33. So just kind of another way to go in and enjoy these collections. Now, Pico I didn't notice before on the other list. So we got 39 titles there. We have, 28 over here. We have Atari. 104 games for Atari, which is cool to see. I don't think we saw that before. We have Virtual Boy with 23 titles, which would give you, I believe, all the games for Virtual Boy. What else do we have here? So we saw Mega Drive, we saw Master System, we saw Game Gear, Game Boy Color. We saw regular Game Boy, Wonder Swan. Oh, MSX and Nintendo DS, right? Oh, the whole bottom line we didn't see before. So MSX has how many titles? 299 games in MSX. We have Nintendo DS with 6 games. Now, I was never a big DS guy myself, but I have actually played Need for Speed Underground 2, and I've played Lego Star Wars 2. So, good selection, I guess. Only 6 games, but it gets you started. So we'll definitely test out some of these collections momentarily. A Thomas Wave, which I am a big fan of. 20 titles there. The games that I like for a Thomas Wave, I don't know if I would play on this setup, but we'll dive in here and we'll test it out. Interested to see how it actually performs. Max Speed is pretty cool. Rumblefish games are good. So we'll back out. So Sega Naomi here with how many titles? 16 games. That's pretty sweet. So let's see. Do we have WWF Royal Rumble? We have what looks like some great titles so far. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, certainly can't go wrong with that. Now, we did have it in Dreamcast, so we don't have WWF Royal Rumble, which is my favorite for this collection, but that's okay. And what else do we have? We have ports in here. Oh, wow, a lot of ports. So we have 12 different ports. A lot of Quake stuff, Rick Dangerous, Super 3D, Noah's Ark, Wolfenstein 3D, Wolfenstein Spear of Destiny, Cannonball, Cave Story. Looks pretty sweet here. And then again, a lot of Quake. And then we have apps here. So we can turn bezels on and off, which is pretty cool. We have dark mode and quick power off. So that's good. And that's everything. So this is actually very impressive, especially for just 64 gigabytes. This has way more than what I was expecting. So I'm stoked to dive in and test this out. Let's do it. Let's go into some of the more demanding stuff, and then I'll throw in some random stuff as well. So right off the bat, I'm going to pick PlayStation, Dreamcast, and PSP as those seem to be the most demanding, and then we'll go into some classic arcade. I'm not going to bother with Game Boy, Neo Geo, stuff like that I know is going to run perfectly fine. Let's go with the more demanding stuff and see what the experience is like. All right, guys, we just jumped out of the Anbernic RG35XX Plus, and this definitely has some major advancements from the previous version. They've gone in and upgraded the RAM to 1GB DDR4 RAM, which is awesome. New chipset on here, and we also have a new battery with up to 27% added capacity to the battery, and I definitely noticed the difference with the battery because I gamed on this now for over an hour and a half for this video. Obviously, I shortened the demo segments here to obviously save time in the video and not make this a super lengthy video. But I barely saw a drop in the battery life here with that indicator in the top right corner. So that definitely shows me that even with the advanced collections that I mostly gamed on today, the battery life just doesn't plummet on this. It just definitely stays reliable and stays, really charged up. So that's a great thing. I love the layout and design of this. This is the style handheld that I gravitate towards. I love that Game Boy Color sort of layout to it where it's a more vertical setup. 4 buttons on here are great. They're raised up a little bit more. They have a glossy top to them. So really responsive, excellent action on those. Same with the shoulder and trigger buttons in the back. And I love the taper on the back where they start up ever so slightly and taper downward. I think that it just fits perfectly to where your fingers are. It's just got a nice kind of sculpted feel to it. I also love the finish of this. It's not super matte, but it feels matte, if that makes any sense. It's not a glossy surface where you're going to be constantly dropping it or it's going to feel like you're sliding it out of your hands. It definitely fits nicely in my hands. I don't have super tiny hands by any means, but it's still, even in bigger hands, it feels pretty good. I also like these ridges on the back. It just gives you a little something to grab onto with the inside of your hands as you secure it. Menu button is great. Volume control and audio quality is phenomenal on here, and I love the 3.5-inch IPS screen. Resolution is great. Picture quality, phenomenal on here. And it feels much larger than it actually is. 3.5 inches is not a massive screen by any means, but it feels pretty big on this particular handheld. The only thing control-wise on here or layout-wise that I'm not crazy about is the D-pad. It feels really restricting, in all honesty. I think that navigating with it definitely takes a little getting used to, and I feel like it broke in a little bit in the hour and a half plus that I've been gaming on here, but it still feels very stiff. And I notice it more with titles where you're intended to be using an analog stick or joystick. So arcade titles, or jumped into some Dreamcast and PS1 on here, and it just felt very restricting. So Gauntlet Legends, for example, it's my all-time favorite game. I'm very used to playing it. I know the timing of the game very well, especially in those early levels, just because I've played those a lot more. Very used to it, and I found it very challenging to actually maneuver and to navigate because I'm trying to move something that was designed to be used with analog sticks and joysticks, and now I'm using a D-pad, which is just much slower, much tighter feel to it, and in the end, you're just not as precise. And I also felt that with PSP, and I want to talk about the performance here. So the performance here, in terms of what the handheld can handle and emulate effectively, everything works. There are some limitations with PSP. Everything else, though, perfect. No limitations with Dreamcast or PlayStation 1. PSP, I definitely felt like certain titles, the more demanding titles, Tekken 5, Tekken 6, I definitely had to go in and adjust frame rates. And I did that when I showed you guys Tekken 5 here. I went in here and I adjusted the frame rate and I got it better. I didn't get it perfect, and I think I could spend a little bit more time on it and improve upon it, but I don't think I'll ever get it 100% perfect. There's just a lot that, is required for that particular title. And I definitely feel like it lags. Even if you go in and you adjust your frame rates and you can tweak some other settings in there to better the experience, you're never going to get 100% perfect, in my opinion. So, definitely limitations within there. Now, Ridge Racer I jumped into, I didn't, make any adjustments to the frame rate there. What you guys saw is exactly how it would be if you jumped in there stock on this handheld. You booted it up, you jumped right into Ridge Racer. That's the experience you would get. So the issue with that is the D-pad, just like I was talking about with Gauntlet Legends and some of the arcade titles. When you go to drift, Ridge Racer, you're drifting in every race with your car. You either commit 100% to a hard drift or you undercommit. So either way, you just can't get that sweet spot. And this is, again, a title that was designed to be used with an analog stick. Not a joystick in this case, it would be an analog stick. That's what was on the PSP console. So it's designed to be used with that. It's not designed for a D-pad where you just don't have, control over the sensitivity. You either drift that car or you barely drift that car. One or the other. In some turns, you're going to be on point. Other turns, you're going to kind of overcorrect to get out of the turn. And in turn, you end up with a slower race and, you're just less effective in there. So I think a lot of times with this, you're going to have issues more so with what you're using to control rather than what the actual console is capable of. So, Gauntlet Legends, for example, again, the issues I had were because of what we're controlling with. It's not because the console can't effectively emulate Dreamcast. We can see that Dreamcast performs very well on here. It just doesn't feel as great as if we had an analog stick. So it is what it is in that regard. I think this would be great for more retro game collections like Super Nintendo, NES, Mega Drive, Master System, all that good stuff. Even arcade for the most part is fine, but the more advanced stuff where you really need to be really responsive, I think you're going to feel like it's just a sluggish sort of feel using the D-pad on here. So weigh out the pros and cons, but in the end, it is a powerful handheld, great capabilities on here, and I think it is a solid option for people to game on for these retro game collections. So just kind of weigh out the pros and cons, take into consideration the unfortunate downside to the D-pad here, but other than that, great experience, and I would definitely recommend this. Just, again, make sure it lines up with the collections and games that you want to use on here. So now the game card that came on here, great selection of titles, actually had tons of games, much more than I actually expected to find on here, especially on just the 64 gigabyte micro SD card, but you can certainly improve upon that. You could move this over to a larger capacity card if you wanted to, add more games. There's tons of ways to customize it to exactly what you're looking for, but for a stock card that's included with a handheld, it's an exceptional option. So I'll put a link up here at the top of your screen. You guys can get some additional information on what the Anbernic RG35XX Plus has to offer you guys. That's going to do it for today, though. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you guys thought of this handheld, and if you already have it, let me know in the comment section what your experience has been like with it. That's going to do it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching and supporting the channel. Be sure to click the thumbs up button right here on the video, and of course hit subscribe to stay in the loop for all future videos.